Martin Reed, a 58-year-old janitor at Pearson Whitfield, one of Boston's most prestigious law firms, quietly went about his work each evening. With his stooped shoulders and weathered hands, he appeared to be just another invisible service worker to the ambitious attorneys who populated the gleaming offices. The firm's rising star, 35-year-old Bradley Harrison, had recently won a high-profile corporate case that had the partners considering him for early promotion. His designer suits and Mercedes-Benz spoke of his success, but his treatment of support staff revealed his character. It was a Wednesday evening when their worlds collided. The firm was hosting potential clients, executives from a Fortune 500 company. The conference room sparkled, expensive wines were uncorked, and Bradley was in his element, commanding attention. Martin entered quietly to replace a flickering light bulb that had been reported. As he carefully climbed his ladder, Bradley was midway through an impressive legal argument. "Excuse me, sir," Martin said politely. "I'll just be a minute to fix this light." Bradley's face tightened with annoyance. "Is this really the time? We're in the middle of something important here." "The work order said it was urgent," Martin explained softly. "The facilities manager—" "Do you think any of us care what your work order says?" Bradley's voice rose, seeing an opportunity to display his authority. "Some of us are handling million-dollar deals while others are changing light bulbs. There's a hierarchy for a reason." The room fell uncomfortable silent. The potential clients shifted in their seats. "I understand, sir. I'll come back later," Martin said, his dignity intact despite the flush of embarrassment on his face. "No, actually, this is a teaching moment," Bradley continued, gesturing to the clients. "This is why education matters, ladies and gentlemen. Some choices lead to the corner office, others to the janitor's closet." As Martin carefully descended the ladder, Bradley turned to the group with a smirk. "Now, where were we before the interruption? Ah yes, precedent in contract law." What Bradley didn't notice was the particular way Martin's eyes had narrowed at the mention of precedent, or how the older man's hand had instinctively corrected Bradley's misquoted case law under his breath. Outside the conference room, Diana Chen, a junior associate who had witnessed the exchange, followed Martin. "I'm sorry about that," she said. "Bradley can be—" "A bully?" Martin offered with a small smile. "I've met plenty in my time." "He shouldn't have spoken to you that way," Diana insisted. Martin shrugged. "People see what they expect to see, Miss Chen." "You know my name?" she asked, surprised. "I know everyone's name," he replied. "And contrary to Mr. Harrison's belief, some of us ended up changing light bulbs by choice, not limitation." Diana looked at him curiously, noticing for the first time something in his eyes that seemed oddly out of place, a sharp intelligence that didn't match his role. "What do you mean by that?" she asked. Martin simply smiled. "Everyone has a story, Miss Chen. Some are just less visible than others." As he walked away with his toolbox, Diana couldn't shake the feeling that there was much more to Martin Reed than anyone at Pearson Whitfield had ever bothered to discover. Chapter 2. The Past Revealed. Diana couldn't stop thinking about Martin's cryptic response. The following week, she found herself staying late at the office, reviewing documents for a case. As Martin quietly cleaned nearby, she decided to strike up a conversation. "You've been here a long time, haven't you, Martin?" He nodded, emptying a trash bin. "Going on 8 years now." "And before that?" Martin paused, leaning on his broom. "A bit of this, a bit of that." Diana sensed his reluctance, but pressed gently. "The way you reacted when Bradley was talking about the Hartman precedent. You knew he was wrong, didn't you?" A flicker of surprise crossed Martin's face. "You noticed that?" "I did. He cited Hartman versus Western Trust, but that wasn't the relevant case. It should have been Hartman versus Collins Financial." Martin's face broke into a genuine smile. "Very good, Ms. Chen. Not many would have caught that distinction." "So, how did you?" she asked directly. After a long moment, Martin sighed and sat down in a nearby chair. "I wasn't always a janitor." He looked at his worn hands. "There was a time when people called me Professor Reed." Diana's eyes widened. "Professor? Of law?" Martin nodded. "Harvard Law for 22 years. Constitutional law was my specialty, though I published extensively on contract law too. But why are you working as a janitor? Martin finished her question. Life takes unexpected turns. My wife Ellen was diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's 15 years ago. The care she needed. His voice trailed off. Our insurance wasn't enough. I took a sabbatical to care for her, wrote a few controversial papers criticizing corporate influence in the judicial system, and suddenly found my tenure under review. They forced you out? Diana was incredulous. Let's just say I made powerful enemies. After Ellen passed away, I tried to return, but doors that had once been open were firmly closed. Academic blacklisting is very real, Ms. Chen. But with your credentials, you could have practiced law. Martin shook his head. I never took the bar exam. I went straight into teaching after my JD and PhD. By the time I considered practice, I was in my 50s, with a resume gap and a reputation as a troublemaker. He smiled ruefully. This job has its advantages. Good health insurance, flexible hours, and no one expects much from you. I've had time to write, to think, to observe. Are you still writing? Diana asked. Under a pseudonym, Martin admitted. Theodore Maxwell. Perhaps you've heard of him, Diana gasped. Theodore Maxwell? The legal scholar who published Justice in the Shadows last year? That's you? The book had caused a sensation in legal circles for its brilliant analysis of systemic issues in corporate law. Martin put a finger to his lips. Our secret. I've found there's a certain freedom in invisibility. But Bradley and the others, the way they treat you, is exactly why I haven't corrected their assumptions, Martin said. People are most revealing when they think no one important is watching. Diana stared at the unassuming man before her. This isn't right, Martin. Someone with your mind shouldn't be cleaning offices. Everyone has value, regardless of their job, Martin countered. But I appreciate your sentiment. He stood, returning to his cart. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have the 3rd floor to finish. As he walked away, Diana pulled out her phone, searching for Theodore Maxwell. Within minutes, she was looking at academic citations, interviews, and the cover of his groundbreaking book, all created by the man who quietly cleaned the offices of those who would never think to look up his work. What neither Martin nor Diana realized was that Bradley Harrison was working late too, and had overheard just enough of their conversation from around the corner to pique his interest and concern. Chapter 3. The Challenge. 2 weeks later, Pearson Whitfield was in crisis mode. Their biggest client, Meridian Healthcare, was facing a class action lawsuit that threatened not only the company but potentially the firm's reputation as well. The partners called an all-hands meeting in the main conference room. This is unprecedented, managing partner Victoria Winters explained to the assembled attorneys. The plaintiffs are using a novel legal theory combining tort law and previously unrelated precedents. Our usual strategies won't work here. Bradley Harrison spoke up confidently. I've been reviewing similar cases. I think I can craft a defensive strategy based on the Wilkins Doctrine. Several senior partners nodded appreciatively, but Diana Chen found herself thinking of Martin, or rather, Professor Reed. This was exactly the type of legal puzzle that had made Theodore Maxwell's work so revolutionary. The meeting continued late into the evening. As the cleaning staff began their rounds, Diana noticed Martin quietly emptying trash bins at the back of the room, seemingly invisible to everyone else. When the discussion hit another dead end, Diana took a deep breath and raised her hand. I'd like to suggest a different approach, she said. When Victoria nodded, Diana continued. The plaintiffs are connecting seemingly unrelated precedents, but what if we look at this through the lens of judicial review rather than pure tort law? There's an argument to be made about regulatory overreach that could undermine their entire case structure. The room fell silent. Bradley looked at her with narrowed eyes. That's an interesting theory, Chen. Where exactly did you come up with that? Diana hesitated. It's based on some recent scholarship I've been reading. Really? Bradley challenged. because it sounds suspiciously like something out of Maxwell's latest article, which I happened to read last night. Diana felt her face flush. From the corner of her eye, she saw Martin pause in his work. "There's nothing wrong with applying relevant legal theory," she defended. "Except Maxwell is an academic with no practical experience," Bradley scoffed. "His theories are intellectually interesting, but useless in actual litigation. Trust me, I've tried cases like this before." Victoria Winters looked thoughtful. "Actually, I think Diana might be onto something. The regulatory angle could give us leverage." Bradley's face darkened. "With all due respect, Victoria, this approach would never stand up in court. It's too theoretical." At the back of the room, Martin accidentally knocked over a trash can, drawing everyone's attention. "Sorry," he mumbled, quickly cleaning up the mess. Bradley rolled his eyes. "As I was saying before we were interrupted, again, by the cleaning staff," he emphasized pointedly, "this approach is fundamentally flawed." Something in Diana snapped. "Actually," she said clearly, "I think we should hear from Martin on this." The room went completely silent. Partners exchanged confused glances. "The janitor?" Bradley finally asked, incredulous. "You want legal advice from the janitor?" Diana stood her ground. "Martin Reed was Professor Martin Reed of Harvard Law before he became our janitor. He's Theodore Maxwell." All eyes turned to Martin, who had straightened up, no longer affecting the slight stoop he typically carried. "Is this some kind of joke?" Bradley demanded. Martin cleared his throat. "It's not a joke, Mr. Harrison. Though I admit I've enjoyed the irony of emptying your trash while you misquote my work." Victoria Winters recovered first. "Professor Reed, Theodore Maxwell, I don't understand." "It's a long story," Martin said simply. "But Ms. Chen is correct about the regulatory approach. In fact, there's a precedent in the Ninth Circuit that wasn't widely reported. Johnson v. Meridian West, actually involving a subsidiary of your current client, that directly supports this strategy." Bradley's face flushed with anger and embarrassment. "This is absurd. We can't take legal advice from the maintenance staff." Victoria raised her hand to silence him. "Martin, Professor Reed, would you be willing to elaborate on this approach?" Martin walked to the whiteboard, picked up a marker, and in that moment, transformed before their eyes. His voice took on the confident cadence of a seasoned educator as he outlined a brilliant defensive strategy that had the senior partners leaning forward in their seats. For 30 minutes, he lectured, sketched case connections on the board, and answered complex questions with ease. The room had forgotten he was wearing a janitor's uniform, all except Bradley, who sat seething, watching his moment of glory being stolen by the man he had publicly humiliated. "This is all very interesting," Bradley finally interrupted, "but our client needs proven strategies, not theoretical exercises. I maintain that my approach is the safer option." Victoria looked between the two men. "I think we need to consider both approaches. Bradley, you'll prepare your strategy as planned. And..." She hesitated, looking at Martin. "Professor Reed, would you be willing to consult on this case? We would compensate you appropriately, of course." Martin considered the offer. "I'll help on one condition," he said, "that Ms. Chen leads the alternative strategy team. She recognized the potential when no one else did." Diana stared at him in shock while Bradley's expression darkened further. "Agreed," Victoria said. "We'll reconvene tomorrow to review both strategies." As the meeting broke up, partners and associates approached Martin with questions and comments, many expressing disbelief and curiosity. Bradley stood alone, watching his influence in the firm shift before his eyes. "This isn't over," he muttered to himself, pulling out his phone to make a call. Not by a long shot. Chapter 4. The Confrontation. The next morning, Pearson and Whitfield buzzed with rumors about the janitor professor. Martin arrived dressed not in his usual maintenance uniform, but in a modest but well-fitting suit, carrying a leather briefcase worn with age but clearly of quality. Diana met him in the lobby. "Are you ready for this?" she asked.
handing him a visitor badge. "It feels strange," Martin admitted, "like stepping back in time." When they entered the conference room, the contrast from the previous day was stark. Partners who had barely acknowledged Martin's existence now stood to greet him, offering handshakes and introductions. Bradley arrived last, flanked by two associates carrying stacks of documents. His smile was tight, his eyes calculating. "Professor Reed," he said with exaggerated formality, "how nice to see you in your new capacity." Martin nodded politely. "Mr. Harrison." Victoria called the meeting to order. "We'll hear both strategies today and make our decision. Bradley, would you like to start?" For the next hour, Bradley presented a methodical, traditional defense built on established case law. It was solid, conservative work, exactly what had made him successful. When it was Diana's turn, she began nervously, but gained confidence as she outlined the regulatory approach Martin had suggested, adding her own insights. Martin occasionally contributed, clarifying points and adding depth to the analysis. The partners were clearly intrigued, asking detailed questions about both approaches. As the discussion continued, Bradley's phone buzzed. He checked it, a small smile playing on his lips. "Before we make any decisions," he interrupted, "there's something everyone should know about our distinguished former professor." The room fell silent as Bradley
Stood. "I took the liberty of making some calls last night. It seems Professor Reed didn't simply retire from Harvard Law as he's implied." He looked directly at Martin. "You were forced to resign under rather troubling circumstances, weren't you?" Martin's face remained impassive, but Diana saw his knuckles whiten as he gripped his pen. "According to my sources," Bradley continued, "you were accused of academic misconduct, specifically fabricating data in a major research paper that criticized several corporations that happened to be significant university donors." Murmurs spread through the room. Victoria looked concerned. "Is this true, Professor Reed?" Martin took a measured breath. "The allegations were made, yes. They were also completely false." "That's not what Harvard's review board concluded," Bradley pressed. "They found substantial evidence of impropriety. Your resignation followed shortly after." "Because I refused to retract my findings," Martin said quietly. "The data was sound. The conclusions were uncomfortable for people with influence." Bradley shrugged dramatically. "A convenient explanation. But it does raise serious questions about whether we should be taking legal advice from someone with such compromised credibility. After all, our client's future is at stake." The atmosphere in the room had shifted. Partners exchanged concerned glances, and Diana could see doubt creeping into their expressions. Martin stood slowly. "I see some things never change. When facts challenge power, power rarely yields to facts." He began gathering his notes. "Thank you for the opportunity, but I think my presence may now be a distraction." "Wait," Diana said, standing as well. "This isn't right." She turned to Bradley. "You're doing exactly what those corporations did, discrediting the messenger when you can't refute the message." Bradley smiled coldly. "I'm simply providing relevant information about someone proposing to advise our most important client." Diana felt a surge of anger. "Then let's discuss relevant information. The strategy Professor Reed outlined, have you actually examined it on its merits? Can you refute any of his legal reasoning?" "That's beside the point," Bradley began. "No, it's exactly the point," Diana interrupted. "Because I've spent the night researching, and everything he's proposed is substantiated by case law. The approach is innovative but solidly grounded." She looked around the room. "And more importantly, I've also researched the misconduct allegations." She pulled out a folder. The review was conducted by a 3-person panel. 2 of the 3 had received research funding from companies criticized in Professor Reed's paper. The 3rd was later appointed to a corporate board position at one of those same companies. Victoria looked disturbed. "Diana, where did you get this information?" "Public records," Diana said. "And there's more. After Professor Reed's departure, 3 other faculty members who attempted to continue his research faced similar accusations. All 3 were denied tenure, despite outstanding teaching evaluations."
Martin looked at her with surprise. I didn't know that.
Because you've been too busy being a janitor to defend yourself, Diana said softly. She turned back to the partners. The question isn't whether Professor Reed has credibility. It's whether we as a firm have the courage to use the best legal strategy available, regardless of who proposed it. The room fell silent. Victoria studied both Bradley and Diana thoughtfully, then turned to Martin. Professor Reed, would you be willing to address the specific allegations that were made against your research? Martin nodded. In detail, if you'd like. The data sets are still available and my methodology was sound. I've continued to track the outcomes, which have unfortunately validated my original conclusions. Victoria considered this, then looked at the other partners. I suggest we take 30 minutes to review both strategies purely on their legal merits. Personal histories aside, our obligation is to our client. As the partners filed out for their deliberation, Bradley approached Martin, his voice low. You should have stayed invisible, Professor. Some battles can't be won. Martin met his gaze steadily. That's where you're wrong, Mr. Harrison. The important battles are rarely won in a single confrontation. They're won by those willing to keep standing up, even when it would be easier to stay down. Bradley scoffed and walked away, leaving Martin and Diana alone in the conference room. Thank you, Martin said quietly, for doing what I stopped doing a long time ago, fighting back. Diana smiled. I learned from your book that justice sometimes needs advocates in unexpected places. They waited in silence for the partners to return, both knowing that regardless of the outcome, something fundamental had already changed. Chapter 5. The Redemption. 3 months later, Martin Reed stood in the back of a Boston courtroom, watching as Diana Chen delivered her closing argument in the Meridian healthcare case. She spoke with confidence and clarity, weaving together the regulatory approach he had helped develop with her own insights. The partners had ultimately decided to pursue both strategies in parallel. Bradley's conventional defense as the primary approach, with Diana's team developing the regulatory angle as a backup. But as the case progressed, Diana's strategy had proven increasingly persuasive to the judge. In the gallery beside Martin sat Victoria Winters, her expression thoughtful as she observed the proceedings. On the other side of the courtroom, Bradley watched with a neutral expression that barely concealed his frustration. When Diana finished, the judge thanked both legal teams and announced he would deliver his ruling the following week. As the courtroom emptied, Victoria turned to Martin. That was impressive work, she said. Diana has grown tremendously under your mentorship. Martin nodded. She didn't need much guidance. She had the instincts already. And what about you, Professor? Have you given any thought to our offer? After the strategy meeting 3 months ago, Victoria had approached Martin privately with a proposition. A consultant position at Pearson Whitfield, working specifically on complex cases that required innovative approaches. I'm still considering it, Martin said. Though I admit, being back in a legal environment has been invigorating. The cleaning company speaks highly of you, Victoria noted with a small smile. They're reluctant to lose you. Martin chuckled. There's dignity in all work. That's something I've learned these past years. Diana approached them, her face flushed with the energy of her presentation. Well, how did I do? You were excellent, Martin assured her. Though I might have emphasized the Caldwell precedent a bit more. Diana laughed. Always the professor. Bradley joined their circle, his demeanor professional if not warm. Good work, Chen. The regulatory angle was effective. High praise, coming from you, Diana replied. Bradley turned to Martin. Professor Reed, I understand congratulations are in order. Martin raised an eyebrow. Oh? Harvard Law announced their formal apology this morning, Victoria explained. They're retracting the misconduct findings and have invited you to deliver a guest lecture series next semester. Martin looked genuinely surprised. I hadn't heard. Apparently, Bradley added, an anonymous source provided them with extensive documentation, proving your research was not only accurate but predictive of subsequent corporate behavior. Diana carefully kept her expression neutral, though her eyes shone with satisfaction. The partners felt it might help restore your reputation, Victoria explained, especially after your recent article series in the Law Review created such a stir. Martin nodded slowly, processing this information. That's unexpected. Life often is, Bradley said, extending his hand. I owe you an apology, Professor. My behavior was unprofessional. Martin studied him for a moment before accepting the handshake. Apology accepted, Mr. Harrison. As Bradley walked away, Diana leaned closer to Martin. That seemed almost sincere. People can surprise you, Martin replied. Sometimes they even surprise themselves. 1 week later, the judge ruled largely in favor of Pearson and Whitfield's defense of Meridian Healthcare, specifically citing the regulatory arguments Diana had presented. The victory secured Diana's promotion to senior associate and cemented the firm's reputation for innovative legal strategies. In the celebration that followed, Martin found himself in Victoria's office, signing a contract for a new position, special counsel for complex litigation. As Victoria handed him his new business cards, she smiled. From janitor to special counsel, not a typical career path. Martin took the cards, running his thumb over the embossed lettering. The greatest insights often come from unexpected perspectives. Diana appeared in the doorway, champagne glass in hand. Are you hiding from your own celebration, Professor? Just completing some paperwork, Martin said, showing her his business card. It's official then, she raised her glass. Though I'll miss our late-night discussions by the trash bins. Martin laughed. Those conversations kept me engaged with the law when I thought I'd left it behind forever. As they walked together toward the firm's reception area where the celebration continued, they passed the cleaning staff beginning their evening rounds. Martin stopped to greet each by name, introducing them to Victoria and Diana as valued colleagues. One of the newer janitors, an older man with graying hair, looked at Martin with uncertainty. So you won't be on the night shift anymore, Mr. Reed? I've been reassigned, Martin explained, but we're still colleagues. And remember what I told you about that night course you were considering at the community college? The paralegal program? I submitted my application yesterday. Martin smiled. Good. The firm might have an internship available when you finish. I'll put in a word. Victoria watched this exchange with interest. As they continued toward the reception, she said quietly to Martin, You know, we could use a more structured internship program for non-traditional students. Are you offering me another job already? Martin asked with amusement. Just recognizing untapped potential, Victoria replied. Something you've been doing all along, it seems. In the reception area, Martin found himself face to face with Bradley again. The younger attorney held 2 glasses of champagne and offered one to Martin. To new beginnings, Bradley said. Martin accepted the glass, and to the lessons we learn along the way. As they clinked glasses, Bradley asked, Does it feel good? The vindication? Martin considered the question. Vindication isn't what matters in the end, he said finally. What matters is staying true to your principles, even when they come at a cost. Bradley nodded slowly. I'm beginning to understand that. He hesitated, then added, I've been reading your earlier work. Before the controversy. Your analysis of judicial independence was eye-opening. Perhaps we could discuss it sometime, Martin offered. Different perspectives can be valuable. As Martin moved through the celebration, accepting congratulations and engaging in legal discussions with partners who had once overlooked him completely, he caught Diana's eye across the room. She raised her glass in a silent toast, and he returned the gesture. In that moment, Martin Reed, janitor, professor, legal scholar, and now special counsel, reflected on the strange and unexpected journey that had brought him here. He had lost much along the way, but had perhaps gained something even more valuable, the chance to make a difference again, to mentor a new generation, and to prove that true expertise and character could shine through any circumstance, even from behind a janitor's cart. The next morning, as he entered Pearson and Whitfield wearing a suit instead of a uniform, he paused in the lobby to straighten a picture frame that was slightly askew. Old habits die hard. A junior associate watching him smiled uncertainly, not quite sure what to make of the firm's newest special counsel. Martin smiled back. "Details matter," he said simply, before continuing on to his new office, ready to begin the next chapter.